Year 4, Miss Fowler here again, here to read the next few chapters of The Witches for you. So we are on chapter 17, which is The Plan. When we got back to the bedroom, my grandmother took me and Bruno out of her handbag and put us on the table. "Why on earth didn't you speak up and tell your father who you were?" she said to Bruno. "Because I had my mouth full," Bruno said. He jumped straight back into the bowl of bananas and went on with his eating. "What a very disagreeable little boy you are," my grandmother said to him. "Not boy," I said, "mouse." "Quite right, my darling, but we don't have time to worry about him at this moment. We have plans to make. In about an hour and a half's time, all the witches will be going down to supper in the dining room, right?" "Right," I said. "And every one of them has got to be given a dose of mouse maker," she said. "How on earth are we going to do that?" "Grandmama," I said, "I think you're forgetting that a mouse can go places where human beings can't." "That's quite right," she said. "But even a mouse can't go creeping around on the tabletop carrying a bottle and sprinkling mouse maker all over Witch's roast beef without being spotted." "I wasn't thinking of doing it in the dining room," I said. "Then where?" she asked. "In the kitchen," I said, "while their food is being got ready." My grandmother stared at me. "My darling child," she said slowly, "I do believe that turning you into a mouse has doubted your brain power." "A little mouse," I said, "can go scuttling around the kitchen among the pots and pans, and if he's very careful, no one will ever see him." "Brilliant," my grandmother cried out. "By golly, I think you've got it." "The only thing is," I said, "how do I know which food is theirs? I don't want to put it into all the wrong saucepans. It would be disastrous if I turned all the other guests into mice by mistake, and especially you, Grandmama." "Then you'll just have to creep into the kitchen and find a good hiding place and wait and listen. Just lie there in some dark cranny, listening and listening to what the cooks are saying. And then, with a bit of luck, somebody's going to give you a clue. Whenever they have a very big party to cook for, the food is prepared separately." "Right," I said, "then that's what I'll have to do. I shall wait there and I shall listen and I shall hope for a bit of luck." "It's going to be very dangerous," my grandmother said. "Nobody welcomes a mouse in the kitchen. If they see you, they'll squish you to death." "I won't let them see me," I said. "Don't forget you'll be carrying the bottle," she said, "so you won't be nearly so quick and nippy." "I can run quite fast standing up with the bottle in my arms," I said. "I did it just now, don't you remember? I came all the way up from the Grand High Witch's room carrying it." "What about unscrewing the top?" she said. "That might be difficult for you." Let me try," I said. I took hold of the little bottle and using both my front paws, I found I was able to unscrew the cap quite easily. "That's great," my grandmother said. "You really are a very clever mouse." She glanced at her watch. "At 7:30, she said, "I shall go down to the dining room for supper with you in my handbag. I shall then release you under the table together with the precious bottle, and from then you'll be on your own." There's just a picture there of him with that mouse maker bottle. "You will have to work your way unseen across the dining room to the door that leads into the kitchen. There will be waiters going in and out of that door all the time. You'll have to choose the right moment to nip in behind one of them, but for heaven's sake, make sure you don't get trodden on or squeezed in the door." "I'll try not to," I said. "And whatever happens, you mustn't let them catch you." "Don't go on about it, Grandmama. You're making me nervous." "You're a brave little fellow," she said. "I do love you." "What shall we do with Bruno?" I asked her. Bruno looked up. "I'm coming with you," he said, speaking with a mouthful of banana. "I'm not going to miss my supper." My grandmother considered this for a moment. "I'll take you along," she said, "if you promise to stay in my bag and keep absolutely silent." "Will you pass food down from the table for me?" Bruno asked. "Yes," she said, "if you promise to behave yourself. Would you like something to eat, my darling?" she said to me. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm far too excited to eat. And I've got to keep fit and frisky for the job ahead. It's a big job, all right, my grandmother said. You'll never do a bigger one. And now chapter 18, in the kitchen. The time has come, my grandmother said. The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling? It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl, finishing that 4th banana. Hang on, he said. Just a few more bites. No, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I had never seen her like that before. I'm going to put you both in my handbag now, she said, but I shall leave the clasp undone. She popped Bruno in first. I waited, clutching the little bottle to my chest. Now you, she said. She picked me up and gave me a quick kiss on the nose. Good luck, my darling. Oh, and by the way, you do realise you've got a tail, don't you? A what? I said. A tail, a long curly tail. I must say that never occurred to me, I said. Good gracious me, so I have. I can see it now. I can actually move it. It's rather grand, isn't it? I mention it only because it might come in useful when you're climbing around in the kitchen, my grandmother said. You can curl it around and you can hook onto things and you can swing from it and lower yourself to the ground from high places. I wish I'd known this before, I said. I could have practiced using it. Oh, well, too late now, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She popped me in her handbag with Bruno, and at once I took up my usual perch in the same small side pocket so I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick, and out she went into the corridor to the lift. She pressed the button, and the lift came up, and she got in. There was no one else in there with us. Listen, she said, I won't be able to talk to you much when we're in the dining room. If I do, people will think I'm dotty and talking to myself. The lift reached the ground floor and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and across the lobby of the hotel and entered the dining room. It was a huge room with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were already in their places, starting to eat their suppers. Waiters were buzzing around all over the place, carrying plates and dishes. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall about halfway down the room. My grandmother made her way to it and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see in the very centre of the room 2 long tables that were not yet occupied. Each of them carried a notice fixed on it on a sort of silver stick, and the notice said, reserved for the members of the RSPCC. My grandmother looked towards the long tables, but said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it over the handbag on her lap. Her hand slid under the napkin and took hold of me gently. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up close to her face and whispered, I'm about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloth reaches almost to the ground, so no one will see you. Have you got hold of the bottle? Yes, I whispered back. I'm ready, Grandmama. Just then, a waiter in a black suit came over and stood by our table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. My name is William. Good evening, madam, he said to my grandmother. Where is that little gentleman tonight? He's not feeling very well, my grandmother said. He's staying in his room. I'm sorry to hear that, William said. Today there is green pea soup to start with, and for the main course you have a choice of either grilled fillet sole or roast lamb. Pea soup and lamb for me, please, my grandmother said. But don't hurry it, William. I'm in no rush tonight. In fact, you can bring me a glass of dry sherry first. Of course, ma'am, William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something, and as she bent down, she slid me out from under the napkin onto the floor under the table. Go, darling, go, she whispered, and then straightened up again. I was on my own now. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door to the kitchen was, and I had to go about halfway round the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought, and like a flash, I skittled out from under the table and made for the wall. I had no intention of going across the dining room floor. It was far too risky. My plan was to cling close to the skirting of the wall and all the way round until I reached the kitchen door. So you can see Grandmama there talking to William. And you can see him just there going next to the skirting boards now around the outside of the room. I ran. Oh, how I ran. I don't think anyone saw me. They were too busy eating. But to reach the door leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance to the dining room. I was just about to do this when in poured a great flood of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first, I saw only the shoes and ankles of those women who were surging in through the door. But when I glanced up a little bit higher, I knew at once who they were. They were the witches coming in to dinner. I waited until they all passed by me, and then I dashed on towards the kitchen door. A waiter opened it to go in. I nipped in after behind him and hid behind a garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, just listening to all the talk and the racket. By golly, what a place the kitchen was. The noise, the steam, and the clatter of pots and pans, and the cooks all shouting, and the waiters all rushing in and out from the dining room yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups and 2 lambs and 2 fish for table 28. 3 apple pies and 2 strawberry ice creams for table 17. Stuff like that going on all the time. Not far above my head, there was a handle sticking out from one of the sides of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turned a somersault in the air, and caught hold of the handle with the end of my tail. Suddenly, there I was, swinging to and fro, upside down. It was terrific. I loved it. This, I told myself, is how a trapeze artist in a circus must feel as he goes swishing through the air. So a picture there of everything that's going on in the kitchen. And you can see, yeah, just over here. The only difference was that his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze, or my tail, could swing me in any direction I wanted. Perhaps I would become a circus mouse after all. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says this is too tough. This meat is not good enough, and she wants another portion." One of the cooks says, "Give me her plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped round the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. Then he said, "Come on, boys, give us some gravy." He carried the plate round to everyone in the kitchen. And do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat onto the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon, another waiter came in and shouted, "Everyone in the big RSPCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit further round the garbage bin so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the largest silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite side wall. "Into that silver basin is where the soup is going," I told myself. "So that's where the stuff in my little bottle must go as well." I noticed that high up near the ceiling, above the side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. If I can somehow clamber up to that shelf, I thought, then I've got it. I shall be directly above that silver basin. But I must first I must somehow get across to the other side of the kitchen and then up onto that middle shelf. A great idea then came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the garbage bin. Then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I had seen last Easter, and the way he had got the trapeze swinging higher and higher and higher, and then he had to let it go at just the right time to go flying through the air. So, at just the right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring clear across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, what marvellous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shimmy up the little wire pipe in the corner, and in no time at all, I was up on the very top shelf, just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and frying pans. So you can see there him doing his trapeze with his tail. I knew that no one could possibly see me up here. It was a superposition, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin that they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle. I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf. I quickly poured what was in it straight into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a gigantic saucepan of steamy green pea soup and poured the whole lot into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and shouted, "Soup for the big party, all ready to go out." Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I'd done it. Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get that mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was much easier to move without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one of the saucepan handles of another all the way along that top shelf, while far below me, cooks and waiters were bustling around and kettles were steaming and pans were spluttering and pots were boiling. And I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the life. What fun it is to be a mouse and doing an exciting job like this. So you can see him again flying there to get onto that top shelf, and then in this one here, pouring that mouse maker down. I kept right on swinging. I swung most marvellously from handle to handle, and I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot I was in full view of everyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly that I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look, a dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below of a white-coated figure in a tall white hat, and then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whizzed around through the air, and there was a shoot of pain at the end of my tail. And suddenly, I was falling and falling head first towards the floor. As I fell, I knew just what had happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash on the floor and everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me, there were big black boots going stamp, 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 and I dodged around them and ran, twisting and turning and dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stamp on it!" The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots stamping away at me, and I dodged, swerved, and twisted and turned, and then, in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up the trouser leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers! He's got up my trouser! Hold on, boys! I'll get him this time!" The man's hands began slapping at the trouser leg. And now I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go, and that was up. I dug my little claws into the hairy skin of the man's leg and scuttled upwards, higher and higher, past the calf and past the knee and onto the thigh. "Holy smoke!" the man was yelling. "It's going all the way up! It's going right up my leg!" I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks. And I kept climbing, and I kept dodging. And very soon I reached the top of the trouser leg, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help, help, help!" the man was screaming. "It's in my knickers! It's running round my flaming knickers! Get it out! Someone help me get it out!" "Take your trousers off, you silly slob!" someone else shouted. "Pull down your pants! We'll soon catch him!" I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onwards and found the top of the other trouser leg. I went down it like a greased lightning and came out of the bottom of it, once again on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers, get it out! Will someone please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding round him and laughing their heads off, and nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sack of potatoes. So you can see the bottom of his trouser leg there when he's going up, and you can see him there dancing around when he's inside the pair of trousers. I burrowed down in among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started the cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because there they were shouting, "It's not in there! There's no mice in there, you silly twerp!" "There was, I swear there was!" the man was shouting back. "You never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling, in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again, the kitchen was all of a bustle, with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with the complaint about rough meat. "Hey, boys," he shouted. "I asked the old lady if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really tasty." I had to get out of the kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, waiting for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled it around me to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it was missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a bunch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each arm and 2 more balanced on each arm as well. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. So I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across the kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light, and I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again in those old-fashioned black shoes with her straps and buttons. I shimmied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you." There they are at the very moment, eating that soup. Suddenly, she withdrew her hand. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "My darling, what's happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered back. "It hurts like billy-o." "Let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "You poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That will stop the bleeding." She fished a small lace-edged handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. "You'll be all right now," she said. "Just try to forget about it. Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup?" "Every drop," I said. "Do you think you could put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she answered. "My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you there, and then you can peep out as long as you're careful not to be seen. Bruno is there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's been keeping him busy for a while." So there he is inside Grandmama's bag, probably with a bit of handkerchief around his tail. Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off of her lap and transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said. "This is a great roll," he said, nibbling away at the bottom of the bag. "But I wish there was butter on it." I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches were clearly sitting at their 2 long tables in the centre of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were cleaning away their plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke over everything. All around us, the summer holiday guests in this rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking sticks, but there were also plenty of families with a husband, a wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be if you wanted to stay in Hotel Magnificent. That's her, Grandmama, I whispered. That's the Grand High Witch. I know, my grandmother whispered back. She's the tiny one in the black sitting at the head of the nearest table. She could kill you, I whispered. She could kill anyone in this room with her white hot sparks. Look out, my grandmother whispered. The waiter's coming. I popped down out of sight and heard William saying, Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots? Carrots, please, my grandmother said, but no potatoes. I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering. It's all right, he's gone. I popped my head up again. Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this, I whispered. No, she answered, I don't suppose they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips. You're doing beautifully, I said. I've counted the witches, she said. There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you? You said about 200. Well, it seemed like 200, I said. I was wrong too, my grandmother said. I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England. How many are there? I asked. 84, she said. There were 85, she said, but one of them got fried. At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. Look out, Grandmama, I whispered. Here comes Bruno's father. And that is the end of our chapters today. There aren't actually very many left. There is 4 left. So hopefully Mrs. Cross and Mrs. Plews will read those to you soon and we get to find out whether that mouse maker worked or not. I do hope you enjoyed those chapters today and I will see you soon. Bye for now.